Hey everybody, Collector Kelly coming at you guys with a different kind of video than we normally do for the series. So, we had people, request the fact that there are a billion ingredients in this town. Request that we do like a team building guide. Now, this has nothing to do with the area we're in or the fact that a kid behind us has a cup of coffee that's as big as his head, but it's all about team synergy. Now, you guys know from the last few Wi-Fi battles that I've done that my teams were not synergized. You can't really expect that with certain themes and stuff. But, so, here's a sneak preview of some of the teams that we have for solo typing. But we're going to go over just a simple thing about team building. So, team building, there are multiple types of Pokemon, right? There's the typings, first of all. Then there's, like, specially defensive Pokemon, physically defensive Pokemon, speedy Pokemon, specially offensive, physically offensive, or just have heaps of HP like Chansey, Blizzy, and Happiny. But the thing is, with a normal team, right, you tend to want Pokemon that fill all the roles. So you generally want 4 offensive Pokemon and then 2 bulky / support Pokemon. So what you want to do is, let's say, okay, you want to build your team around Cinderace here, okay? So we'll put Cinderace on our team, and let me just organize these things around a bit. Let's move these Pokemon out of our party, so that way we can actually, design a team around them. And we're not going to go over tiers or anything like that for Smogon, because most of you players that watch me aren't into Smogon, or you play silly tournaments, or things like that. But if you guys want to build teams around not having Paradox Pokemon, then fine, we won't include Paradox Pokemon in this, and we definitely don't include Legendaries. Never include Legendaries in your team building, unless it's like a Legendary only run or something in a video, and that's just... Nobody's going to watch Legendaries only, because they're super overpowered anyway, and it's just not fun to watch. Now, if every encounter was a Legendary where you might not catch them and stuff, yeah. Okay, so let's say we want to build a team around Cinderace. Okay, well, this one that came in the raid is Fire with Terra-type Fighting. So that means if he uses his Terra-typing, he'll turn into Fighting, but then his ability Libero will not activate. So it's best just to, not worry about Libero unless you want to. Now, if you see, he's a physical attacker, right? He has High Jump Kick, Pyro Ball, Acrobatics, Iron Head. His 2 primary stats up there are clearly attack and speed. His defenses are balanced. His HP is fairly mediocre. 301 is, at level 100, is about average for a 6 IV starter Pokemon that's not defensive. So, you want to include him, right? Well, he's your fire type. He can also technically be fighting, steel, flying, poison, whatever move that you have on him that, he can turn into. Type-changing Pokemon are great for team building, because they technically don't have to stay in that typing. Do you want to terrestrialize him? No? Well then, if you use Iron Head, he'll become Steel type if your opponent has a lot of Pokemon that are weak to Steel or bad against Steel. Same with Pyro Ball if you want to stay Fire type. Acrobatics if you use like an item that burns up or they steal your item. Acrobatics then can become Stabbed and have the full force boost, which is super good. Now, we're probably looking at it and going, okay, well, you said 4 offensive Pokemon and 2 defensive Pokemon. Do we want all physical attackers on our team? No, you don't. So, another option they could do, let's say, is Baxcalibur, for example. You want that as your second and last physical attacker. Now, I'm not saying that the defensive Pokemon can't also be somewhat offensive and have setup moves. No. That's not the thing. You also don't want a bunch of Pokemon at setup, because if you run into Prankster Taunt, like, for example, we have Dragon Dance on Baxcalibur here. Well, Dragon Dance gets countered by Taunt, so if you run into like a Murkrow with Prankster Taunt, well, guess what? You can no longer set up, you're locked out of that move, you could have wasted a turn, and then they could screw you over and lock you into a specific move, switch into a Pokemon that is immune to that move, or hardcore resists it, and then you end up doing nothing. So, think about that. So you don't want a bunch of multiple setup Pokemon. 2 setup Pokemon is fine. Any more than that is a little risky, especially in a meta where like taunts or things like Clear Smog and stuff exist. That goes for VGC too. I know a lot of people have issues in VGC, and a good Pokemon that makes a good example of this is Torkoal here. Torkoal has access to Clear Smog. Same with, I believe it's Armor Rouge. I don't know if Ceruledge does, but I know Armor Rouge gets it. I know Amoonguss gets it. So if you have issues with setup Pokemon, use them. A lot of defensive Pokemon do have access to stat elimination moves. Haze is another good one. And Haze is interesting because people think, oh, well, why did Haze work when Prankster isn't supposed to work on Dark types? Well, the thing about that is it doesn't target a specific Pokemon. It just targets the entire area, including yourself and all opponents' Pokemon. So meaning Haze doesn't target a specific Pokemon, meaning that Prankster's secondary effect won't work. So, yeah. Anyway, so we're going over this. So we have our two physical attackers. We have this guy with Glaive Rush, Icicle Crush, Dragon Dance, Body Press. He's Terra type, Rock type. I don't recommend using Rock type on him. If you want to, either make him Dragon or Ice to make advantage of his Dragon and Ice type moves, or you can make him Fighting type to get us even stronger Body Press, because he does have a pretty nice defense stat. Not the best, but pretty decent. And can hit those Pokemon that, normally resist his other type stab, but there's a good chance you're not going to be fighting Pokemon that deal with those other stabs. Now, when it comes to Terra typing, you generally want the Terra typing to be one of two things, or I guess one of three things. You either want it to share the same typing, so Cinderace is fire, you can make him Terra type fire, then his Power Ball will hit even harder, because I believe Terra typing is a 1.5% damage or 1.5 times damage increase to whatever typing that attack is. But you also can change them into a typing that makes them immune to something. Or resistant to something. So for an example, back in my VGC team that I use Slacking and Grafaiai in, people loved that video, they thought it was cool, and then they thought about changing Slacking into Ground type. Now, why I didn't make him Ground type or Fighting type to go with Hammer Arm and stuff is one thing. He's a normal type, right? His only weakness is Fighting type. So what did I do to counteract that? I turned him into a Fairy type, or you could turn him into a Ghost type, but Fairy type is better because Fairy type is only weak to Poison and Steel, and Poison and Steel in VGC aren't super common outside of like Clear Smog and stuff, which don't do a lot of damage anyway. And it just makes it so you can go over top of the Pokemon that they normally send out. So I've seen a lot of like Quackable or like Pokemon that just have good fighting type attacks, like Palafin and stuff. They'll come into Slacking, and then you'll terrestrialize them into a Fairy type, and boom, they no longer can do anything to you. If they end up using something like Close Combat, then they drop their defenses, and you just run them over like a truck. So that's another good strategy. And then the third one is to power up a secondary move on your Pokemon. So let's say we're using... Oh, good example right here is Palafin. So we're looking at Palafin, right? It has Close Combat, Terra Blast, Flip Turn, and Jet Punch. Not the best set, I know. But it's Ice type. What does that mean? It then becomes Ice type, gaining new weaknesses and resistances while keeping Stab on the Water moves, but also turning Terra Blast into Ice type. But you could also turn him into a Fighting type to get a powered up Close Combat or Drain Punch, or you can turn him into a Water type, like he already is, and we already mentioned, to get Water Stab even stronger. But I recommend either making it so your Pokemon gains a resistance or an immunity to a type that it would naturally be weak to, or powering up a secondary move, giving it multiple stab. So for example, Charizard here, he is a good one to go over, because he has Dragon, Pulse, Flamethrower, Hurricane, and Terra Blast. Now, thing is, he's Fire Flying, right? So he has Fire Flying stab. So his Flamethrower and Hurricane will always do extra damage, but Dragon Pulse will just do basic damage. But if, like, let's say a Dragapult would have went for Dragon Pulse, it would have got stabbed, so it gets that 1.5 times boost. But Charizard's Dragon Pulse doesn't. But since you can turn him into a terrestrialized Dragon type, he then gains 3 stabs. He'll have Dragon Pulse stab, but only have the weaknesses of a Dragon type Pokemon. And then he'll have Flamethrower and Hurricane as stab, as well as Terra Blast when he transforms into the Dragon type, making him a real big powerhouse. So that's how the terrestrialization will work, especially around offensive Pokemon. Normally you don't terrestrialize your defensive Pokemon unless absolutely necessary, or if you find no other reason whatsoever to, terrestrialize. So, another thing that we want to go over is we want to go over defensive Pokemon. Now, there's a defensive Pokemon around here in one of these bins that I have that I really, really, really recommend you using, even though I personally don't find it enjoyable to use, and that is this little guy. Clodsire. Clodsire is a great one, because he's bulky, he has Unaware, he's not good for doubles, but we're not going over doubles, we're going over singles right now. I will have a VGC one up later, but I could also talk about the VGC Pokemon in this one. But for right now, mainly singles. Now, normally, Clodsire in doubles is just bad. I've faced a few of them. They just get wrecked, especially with how many Unaware Pokemon there are outside of him. And just, if an Unaware Pokemon sets up, well, then, yeah, guess what? Yeah, it's pain. But here's the moveset. So, this is a defensive Pokemon. We have it max special defense, max HP, I believe. No, we have max defense, max special defense, because it's naturally higher in special defense. So, a good thing to do with bulky Pokemon is, another example is this Pokemon right here. It's great in defense, so you usually boost up its special defense instead of its defense, because it already has such a good defense stat. But this Pokemon doesn't really matter. It's a sturdy Pokemon. It was never meant to do anything special. But anyways, going back to the main topic right here, as our physically defensive, specially defensive Pokemon, Toxic Protect is such a toxic combo, no pun intended, like literally no pun intended, even though that's what we're talking about. It is so annoying, because this Pokemon has Unaware. Sure, its stats aren't anything to go, ooh, he's a super strong Pokemon. Like, look at that. He's level 77 and only has those stats. That doesn't matter if the Pokemon has the ability to prevent setting up on it. Sure, if you swap him out and then the new Pokemon comes in, that Pokemon will get nuked, because then it removes the Unaware effect. But Unaware is so powerful. Poison Jab and Earthquake are also great stab combinations that allow for a hard-hitting 100 base power ground-type move and an 80 base power poison-type move that can then poison the target 30% of the time. Earthquake is good for those, pesky steel types, and Poison Jab is just great for, stuff like that. But then that leaves 3 physical attacking Pokemon, even though this one is technically defensive wall. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we want our next wall to potentially be one more on the special side. So, going through our Pokemon, you're probably like, who do I use today? Who do I use today? And here's a good choice. Also, catch on to what I'm doing. You notice something about the 4 Pokemon we're using? Yeah, none of them share the same typing. So we have Fire, we have Ice and Dragon, we have Ground, Poison, and we have Fairy. All different typings. None of them share the same weakness outside of Steel, but we also have a Steel resistance. And let's say, like, Water moves, for example, right? Well, Water moves, we can just switch into this guy. Or, oh no, what's another type? Poison type. Well, we have Poison. Steel, we have Fire. See what we mean? Like, sure, these 2 Pokemon have a Steel weakness, but we have counters to those weaknesses if need be. Now, why I recommend Florges as a good example of a special wall? Well, thing is, it boasts, like, look at that attack stat. I know it's level 100, but it has a 260. We went max defense, and look at its special defense. 378. That is great. It has access to Calm Mind, making itself even more bulky, as well as a self-heal move, but it can also be offensive in that same process. Another one that I could recommend is Screamtail, because it gets access to stored power, as well as Calm Mind and a bunch of cool setup moves, as well as Wish Protect, making it kind of a fun, annoying set to use if you really, really, really feel keen on using stall Pokemon. Now, another thing, we need to go on to our special attacking Pokemon. So, like I said, we're just going to skip over, like, the Paradox Pokemon. So, the thing is, we have a decently fast, but harder hitting physical attacker, and then we have a really fast, decent hitting physical attacker. So you generally want one that's fast and then one that's not as fast, or you can go with two fast ones. A good option would be like Armor Rouge if you don't already have a fire type, but I don't recommend it right now because we already have a fire type. We don't have any weaknesses to dark yet, but this gives us a weakness to dark, but we do have a resistance, so that's not really the best Pokemon. Another option that we don't want to use is Zoroark, because while we could hide it behind Clodsire, the issue is then we have another Pokemon weak to fighting, and we have two resistances, but we don't want too many Pokemon weak to the same typing, if you get my drift, you know? So then we can do something like Clawitzer. Clawitzer is an interesting one because it has a great ability in Mega Launcher. You can give it the Choice Specs and the Life Orb, and we also have the Water type, which means we are weak to grass and electric. So we have an electric immunity. What about a grass immunity? We have a grass resistance. Actually, there's no Pokemon immune to grass, by the way, so don't go looking for them. So we'll pick Clawitzer as our first one for our special attackers. It's not super fast, but it hits pretty hard with its Mega Launcher ability, which powers up Pulse moves, including Aura Sphere. So Water Pulse, Dragon Pulse, Aura Sphere, and Dark Pulse are all powered up. And so he's not a fast one, but he's also not a setup Pokemon. So then for our last Pokemon, we could do something cool. We don't have a grass type yet, and we don't have any weaknesses to fire. So we'll choose Lilligant. It has Chlorophyll, doesn't really matter too much. It has Quiver Dance. It has access to healing moves like Giga Drain. It gets awesome moves like Pollen Puffer, Leaf Storm. And it has a weakness to flying. Well, guess what? Don't need to resist flying. You could, though, however, swap out like Flower Girl for something like a bulky Orthworm or something like that, but then you have another weakness to fighting, and that's kind of a bummer. But overall, not that bad. Fire weakness. We have a fire Pokemon that resists it. We have a Pokemon that, if it gets hit by fire type moves, gets powered up. And we have a water type move. Ice Pokemon. We have a water Pokemon. We have an ice dragon, and we have a fire. And bug. Well, guess what? We have a fire type. We have a poison type. And we have a fairy type. All resistant. And this Pokemon could be your special setup Pokemon, like we have a physical setup Pokemon. And then these two will just be your hard-hitting offensive sweepers. So I hope you guys get the gist of how to build a team. And if you guys want to see anything else, let me know. VGC teams are pretty similar, but you have to come up with a gimmick either around singles 3v3 or doubles 4v4. Doubles is way more interesting, is usually what the championships are based off of, is the doubles. Another thing we could do is we could go over items. So, for example, on a Pokemon like Clodsire, for example, you want it to recover its HP. But Leftovers isn't really the one you want to go for. And why I say that is because if you want Leftovers on your team, like if you don't want to duplicate items, like don't use duplicate items, or you're in a tournament where you can't use duplicate items, then I recommend running Black Sludge on this Pokemon, and then Leftovers on Florges. Because they'll both be healing up, they're both your walls, but they won't break item claws. So that's a super, super useful thing. Another thing about Howitzer here, or Clawitzer, Howitzer's the name of my Pokemon, is you could do a few multiple item choices. You could go Life Orb to get boosted damage on each of his attacks. You could go for Choice Specs to make each one of them hit harder, but remember, if you use something like Choice Specs, Band, or Scarf, you're locked into whatever move you use, so then you have to switch out until you want to use another move, or you get Whirlwinded out, or whatever thing happens to you. But that's another option for that. A Pokemon like this, you could go for Focus Sash, and then go for Quiver Dance, set it up, and then hopefully heal up off of a Giga Drain, or just do immense amounts of damage and force them into a Pokemon where you can heal up. Another good example of a Pokemon that can do this is Ceruledge, because of Bitter Blade healing. A lot of setup Pokemon that use dances and Focus Sash really do benefit from a move that heals HP, so that's why we use Giga Drain over Leaf Storm instead of like having more raw base power. Something like Baxcalibur could also benefit from something like a Life Orb. You could also go the variant where it's Icicle Spear. So you use Dragon Dance, you use Icicle Spear, you use Glaive Rush, and then just whatever fourth move you want. Your Dragon and Ice types, your primary ones, but you'll use the loaded dice item. But in this case, I recommend something like a Life Orb, or even a Shell Bell could help. Not the best, but it could. No choice items because it is a dancer, so we don't want to be locked into that move. And last but not least is our last Pokemon here for an item choice. We have Cinderace, which has, 4 attacking moves. If you want to make use of acrobatics, which I don't know if I'd recommend running, I'd personally switch it out for Gunk Shot, which is a really high base power poison type, which gives you resistances and immunities to other typings. But he can do really good with something like Choice Band, because he's really, really fast. So he doesn't really need to outspeed too much, but if you are having issues with like really speedy Pokemon, Choice Scarf is always your best friend. But Choice Band on him is really good. Life Orb is another good item if we weren't using it on, let's say, Baxcalibur, and things like that. So, I hope you guys get the gist of everything. If you guys need me to answer any questions, you can always comment in the comment section below. Remember, every single day of the month, we're giving away shiny Pokemon. Well, we're giving away shiny Pokemon permanently until this channel ends, or I die, or both, or, something like that. So, always be on the lookout for that. Every 100 subscribers will be giving one away now. This one is the Oinkologne. If you guys want to check out the Wi-Fi Battle playlist, that will be on the channel. If you want to join the Discord to, talk about Pokemon, if you need help with Pokemon, if you want a Wi-Fi battle, if you want to be part of the channel, if you guys want to donate, the link is in the description below to the Discord. My other social medias are up on the banner if you guys wanted to follow me on Twitter or anything like that. And I will see you guys next time for another Pokemon Scarlet and Violet video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you guys get the gist of this. And this one might take a little while to edit, but I'll be happy to make it for you guys. So, see you guys next time. Bye-bye.